I am Emma, 28 years old, and family has always been everything to me. My twin brother Brandon and I came into this world together, shared the same birthday celebrations, the same childhood memories, and I always believed we would share all of life's biggest moments. So when he called to tell me about his engagement, my heart filled with joy for him. When he explained why I wouldn't be at his wedding, that joy turned to devastation in ways I never imagined possible. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. What happened next changed not only our relationship, but how I understood my own worth and the power of creating your own validation. This is the story of how being deemed not pretty enough for wedding photos led to the most empowering year of my life. Growing up as twins in suburban Sacramento, Brandon and I were inseparable. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Chen, raised us in a comfortable middle-class home where achievement was valued, but love was never conditional. At least, that's what I believed for the first 27 years of my life. Margaret worked as a nurse practitioner at the local hospital, while Robert managed a regional branch of a financial services company. They provided us with everything we needed: good schools, extracurricular activities, family vacations, and, most importantly, what seemed like unconditional support and love. Brandon and I were fraternal twins, but in many ways, we couldn't have been more different. He was tall, athletic, and effortlessly charismatic. By high school, he was captain of the basketball team, student body president, and the kind of person who seemed to glide through life with natural confidence. I was shorter, studious, and more introspective. While Brandon commanded attention at parties, I preferred small groups and meaningful conversations. Despite our different personalities, we were incredibly close. We had our own twin language until we were 4, shared the same group of friends throughout elementary school, and even chose to attend the same university, UC Davis, though we studied different subjects. Brandon majored in business administration while I pursued elementary education, planning to become a teacher. Our parents never made us feel like they favored one of us over the other. If anything, they seemed to appreciate our different strengths. They celebrated Brandon's athletic achievements in leadership roles just as enthusiastically as they celebrated my academic honors and volunteer work. Family photos from our childhood showed 2 happy, confident kids who clearly felt loved and supported. The first crack in this perfect family picture appeared during our senior year of college, though I didn't recognize it as significant at the time. Brandon started dating girls who all seemed to fit a very specific type: tall, blonde, conventionally beautiful in the way that looks effortless, but probably requires significant time and money to maintain. When I mentioned this pattern to him once, he laughed it off, saying he just had a type. After graduation, we both moved back to Sacramento temporarily while figuring out our next steps. I found a position teaching 5th grade at a local elementary school that I absolutely loved. Working with kids had always felt natural to me, and I discovered I had a real talent for connecting with students who struggled academically or socially. My classroom became known as a place where every child felt valued and capable. Brandon landed a job with a tech startup in San Francisco, which meant he was only a couple hours away, but living in a completely different world. The tech startup culture, with its emphasis on youth, innovation, and a very specific kind of cool, seemed to suit him perfectly. His social media posts showed him at networking events, company parties, and weekend trips to wine country with colleagues who all looked like they could have stepped out of a magazine. It was at one of these company events that Brandon met Stephanie Morrison. Stephanie was everything that Brandon's previous girlfriends had been, but more so. She was a marketing coordinator at a luxury lifestyle brand with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she spent more on skincare than I spent on groceries. Her Instagram account, which I occasionally checked out of curiosity, was a carefully curated collection of perfectly lit photos showcasing an aspirational lifestyle that seemed both effortless and expensive. When Brandon first brought Stephanie home to meet the family, I'd tried to like her. I really did. She was polite to our parents, complimented our mother's cooking, and asked appropriate questions about my teaching job. But there was something about her that felt performative, as if she were playing the role of the perfect girlfriend rather than simply being herself.
The way she interacted with Brandon also concerned me, though I kept these observations to myself. She had a subtle way of steering conversations toward topics that made her look good, redirecting attention to her own achievements, and making little comments that seemed designed to highlight her sophisticated tastes. When our mother showed childhood photos of Brandon and me, Stephanie's response was polite but cool, as if our ordinary suburban upbringing was quaint but unremarkable. Over the 3 years that Brandon and Stephanie dated, I watched my brother gradually change. The easygoing, unpretentious person I had grown up with began adopting some of Stephanie's priorities. He became more concerned with appearances, more focused on social status, and more critical of things he had previously accepted without question. When he visited home, he often seemed restless, as if our family's simple pleasures weren't quite enough anymore. I lived in a cozy apartment in downtown Sacramento, furnished with a mix of secondhand finds and items our parents had given me when they redecorated. I loved my space. It was warm, welcoming, and reflected my personality. When Brandon brought Stephanie to visit, I could see her mentally cataloging everything, from my mismatched dining chairs to my collection of books and student artwork covering the refrigerator. She never said anything critical, but her polite compliments felt like diplomatic responses to a cultural exhibit.
My own social life was fulfilling in a different way than Brandon's. I had close friendships with several teachers at my school, a book club that met monthly, and a community theater group where I helped with costumes and set design. My weekends were spent hiking with friends, volunteering at the animal shelter, or simply enjoying quiet time at home. I dated occasionally, but hadn't found anyone special enough to introduce to the family. The contrast between Brandon's lifestyle and mine became more pronounced as his relationship with Stephanie deepened. Their social media posts showed expensive dinners, weekend getaways to luxury resorts, and carefully staged photos that looked like advertisements for a lifestyle brand. Meanwhile, my Instagram featured pictures of my students' art projects, hiking adventures, and casual gatherings with friends. Our parents seemed fascinated by Stephanie's world, asking questions about her job, her travels, and the glamorous events she attended. They never said anything critical about my simpler lifestyle, but I noticed they seemed more animated when discussing Brandon's life than mine. Margaret would show her friends at work photos of Brandon and Stephanie at wine tastings or charity galas, while my teaching awards and classroom achievements were mentioned more briefly. The family dynamics shifted subtly but noticeably during holiday gatherings. Stephanie's presence seemed to elevate the formality of our celebrations. Margaret would spend extra time on meal preparation and table settings. Robert would wear his better casual clothes, and everyone seemed to be performing a slightly more polished version of themselves. I found myself feeling like an observer at my own family gatherings, watching everyone adapt to accommodate Stephanie's sophisticated expectations. Brandon's conversation topics also evolved during this period. Instead of talking about childhood memories, current events, or family news, he increasingly focused on career advancement, investment opportunities, and social connections that could benefit his professional growth. Stephanie would nod approvingly during these discussions, occasionally adding insights from her marketing background about personal branding and networking strategies. The most troubling change was how Brandon began viewing our family through what seemed to be Stephanie's lens. He made offhand comments about updating his childhood bedroom when he visited, suggested our parents might want to renovate their kitchen to be more modern, and once mentioned that our traditional family photos looked dated compared to the professional portraits that Stephanie's family commissioned annually. Despite these concerns, I genuinely tried to build a relationship with Stephanie. I invited her to lunch when she was visiting Sacramento, sent thoughtful gifts for her birthday and holidays, and made efforts to include her in conversations during family gatherings. She was always polite and appropriate in her responses, but I never felt like we developed any real connection or warmth. The engagement announcement came as both a surprise and an inevitability. Brandon and Stephanie had been together for 3 years, and despite my personal reservations, it was clear that he was completely devoted to her. I had hoped that marriage might help Stephanie feel more secure and perhaps more genuinely warm toward our family, allowing her to drop some of the performative politeness that characterized our interactions. When Brandon called that October evening to share the news, I was genuinely happy for him. Whatever my feelings about Stephanie, I could hear the joy and excitement in his voice, and that mattered more than my own concerns. I was already imagining helping with wedding planning, giving a sister of the groom speech, and welcoming Stephanie officially into our family. I had no idea that the conversation about to unfold would reveal just how fundamentally my place in the family had already shifted, or how little my presence actually mattered to the people I loved most in the world. The phone call that would shatter my world came on a crisp Tuesday evening in early October. I was in my cozy apartment in Portland, grading papers for my 5th grade class, while my cat, Milo, sat perched on my windowsill watching the autumn leaves fall. When I saw Brandon's name flash across my phone screen, I smiled automatically. My twin brother rarely called during the week unless something exciting was happening. "Emma!" His voice was practically bubbling with excitement. "I have the most incredible news to share with you." I set down my red pen and gave him my full attention. "What's going on? You sound like you're about to burst." I announce it, and you can hear the pure joy in his voice. "We're getting married." My heart swelled with happiness for him. Brandon and Stephanie had been together for 3 years, and despite my personal reservations about her, which I had carefully kept to myself, I knew he was deeply in love. "Oh my gosh, Brandon! Congratulations! I'm so happy for you both. Tell me everything. How did you propose? What did she say? I want all the details." For the next 20 minutes, Brandon regaled me with the story of his elaborate proposal. He had arranged for a private vineyard tour, complete with a photographer hidden in the vines to capture the moment. Stephanie's ring was a stunning 3-carat princess-cut diamond that had belonged to our grandmother, a family heirloom that our mother had been saving for Brandon's eventual engagement. "The wedding is going to be absolutely magical," Brandon continued, his excitement infectious. "We're thinking next September, probably somewhere in California wine country. Stephanie has always dreamed of a vineyard wedding, and you know how she loves everything to be picture perfect." That phrase, "picture perfect," would prove to be more significant than I realized at the time.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As Brandon talked about venues and guest lists, I found myself getting caught up in his enthusiasm. Despite my complicated feelings about Stephanie, I was genuinely excited to be part of my twin brother's special day. We had always been close, sharing that unique bond that twins often have. I was already imagining myself helping with wedding planning, maybe giving a speech at the reception, and definitely being involved in all the pre-wedding festivities. "I can't wait to start helping you plan," I said when he paused for breath. "I know you'll probably have a wedding planner, but I'd love to be involved however I can. Maybe I could help coordinate the rehearsal dinner or organize the bachelor and bachelorette parties." There was a strange pause on the other end of the line. When Brandon spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. Still happy, but with an undertone I couldn't quite identify. "That's really sweet of you to offer, Em. Actually, Stephanie and I have been talking about keeping things pretty intimate. You know how she is about having everything just right for the photos and everything?" Something in his phrasing made my stomach flutter with unease, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Of course, I totally understand wanting to keep it small and special. How many people are you thinking?" "Around 150, mostly family and close friends. Stephanie's family is pretty large, and you know how Mom always said she wanted a big celebration when one of us got married." 150 people seemed like a lot for an intimate wedding, but I didn't comment on that. Instead, I started thinking about what I would wear as his sister, wondering if Stephanie would want me to be a bridesmaid or if she'd prefer to stick with her own friends and sorority sisters. What came next was delivered so casually that it took several seconds for my brain to process what Brandon had actually said. "The thing is,
Stephanie and I have been working with this amazing wedding planner, and she's really focused on creating a specific aesthetic for the photos. You know how important the visual elements are for Stephanie. She's already talking about submitting photos to bridal magazines and everything. I made some encouraging noise, still not understanding where this was heading. So we've been really thoughtful about the guest list and the wedding party, making sure everything flows together visually. Stephanie has her 4 best friends as bridesmaids, and I'm having my college roommates as groomsmen. The planner thinks it's going to look absolutely stunning. My heart was still beating normally. I still had no idea what was coming. The guest list has been really challenging because we want to include all the important people while maintaining the right atmosphere. Stephanie's parents have a lot of business associates they need to invite, and our parents obviously want their close friends there. He was rambling now, and something in his tone was making me increasingly nervous. Brandon, just tell me what you need me to know. I'm here for whatever you guys decide. Another pause. Then, well, that's actually what I need to talk to you about, Em. The thing is, with the budget and the venue capacity and the aesthetic Stephanie is going for, we've had to make some really difficult decisions about the guest list. My stomach dropped, though I still didn't want to believe what I was hearing. What kind of difficult decisions? We've decided to limit the guest list to immediate family and absolutely closest friends only, people who really fit with the vision Stephanie has for the day. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt like I was falling through space. Brandon, are you telling me I'm not invited to your wedding? What followed was perhaps more painful than the exclusion itself. Brandon's explanation revealed a level of shallow thinking that I had never imagined my twin brother capable of. It's not that we don't want you there, Em. You have to understand that. It's just, well, Stephanie has this very specific vision for how everything should look. The wedding planner showed us examples from magazines, and there's a certain aesthetic consistency that they're going for. I felt like I was hearing words from underwater. Aesthetic consistency. Brandon, what are you talking about? You know how Stephanie is about appearances, Em? She's not being mean or anything, but she's really focused on having everything coordinate perfectly. The bridesmaids all have the similar look, tall, blonde, you know the type. And for the family photos, the planner suggested keeping the immediate family group small and, well, cohesive.
The word cohesive hit me like a physical blow. I know exactly what he meant, though he was trying to dance around saying it directly. Are you saying I don't fit the aesthetic of your wedding, Brandon? That's not, it's not about you specifically. It's about the overall look that Stephanie wants to achieve. She's dreamed about her perfect wedding since she was little, and every detail matters to her. I sank into my couch, feeling like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. My own twin brother was telling me that I didn't fit the visual requirements for his wedding day. As Brandon continued trying to explain and justify the decision, the full scope of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just about being excluded from one event. This was about being deemed visually unacceptable by my own family. Who else knows about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, Mom and Dad obviously had to be told about the guest list decisions. And Stephanie's family, of course. The wedding planner helped us work through all the logistics. So our parents know that you're not inviting me, and they're okay with this? Brandon's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They understand that it's Stephanie's day and that she should have the wedding of her dreams. Mom did mention that it might seem unusual, but she agrees that we should respect Stephanie's wishes. Our parents not only knew, but had apparently signed off on my exclusion. The betrayal was expanding beyond just Brandon and Stephanie to include our entire immediate family. What about Aunt Linda and Uncle Steve? Cousin Michael, are they invited? Yes, they're all invited. But Emma, you have to understand. No, I don't understand. The words burst out of me with more force than I had intended. I don't understand how my twin brother can invite extended family and family friends, but not his own sister because she doesn't fit the aesthetic of his wedding photos.
Brandon's attempts to defend the decision only made things worse. As he talked, it became clear that this wasn't a spontaneous choice, but something that had been carefully considered and planned. Stephanie has been looking at wedding photos for months, Em. She has binders full of inspiration photos, and she's really focused on achieving a specific look. The wedding planner told us that the most successful weddings have a clear visual theme that runs through everything: the venue, the flowers, the wedding party, even the guest list. The guest list has a visual theme? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounds worse than it is when you say it like that. It's just about creating harmony in all the photos. Think about it. When you see wedding photos in magazines, everything looks perfectly coordinated, right? That's what Stephanie wants. As he continued explaining, I realized that this decision hadn't been made lightly or spontaneously. They had spent months planning how to exclude me while including everyone else. The level of deliberation involved made it somehow more hurtful than if it had been an impulsive choice. "How long have you been planning to not invite me?" I asked. "We've been working on the guest list for about 6 weeks. It's been really challenging because we want everyone we love to be there, but there are just practical limitations." 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, my brother had been planning his wedding while knowing that I wouldn't be included, and he had said nothing during our regular phone calls and family dinners. As if the exclusion itself wasn't enough, Brandon then delivered what felt like the final insult. "But Emma, we really want you to feel included in other ways. Maybe you could help us with some of the pre-wedding activities. You're so good at organizing things, and there are lots of ways you could be involved without actually being at the wedding ceremony and reception." The suggestion that I could help plan the wedding I wasn't invited to attend was so absurd that I almost left. Almost. You want me to help plan your wedding that I can't attend because I don't look right in the photos? It's not about you specifically. It's just about creating harmony in all the photos. Think about it. When you see wedding photos in magazines, everything looks perfectly coordinated, right? That's what Stephanie wants. The patronizing tone in his voice was the last straw. He was offering me the privilege of working behind the scenes on an event that I was deemed unworthy to attend. "Brandon, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You and Stephanie have decided that I don't fit the visual aesthetic of your wedding, so I can't be invited. But you'd like me to help plan and coordinate the events that I'm excluded from attending? Do I have that right?" Emma, please don't be like this. You're making it sound terrible when it's really just about Stephanie having her dream wedding. Her dream wedding doesn't include your twin sister. It's not personal, Em. It's just about the photos and the overall look. That phrase, "it's not personal," would haunt me for weeks. How could excluding your own sister from your wedding not be personal? After we hung up, I sat in my apartment in complete shock. In the span of an hour, I had gone from being excited about helping plan my brother's wedding to learning that I wasn't even considered worthy to attend it. The reasoning was what made it so particularly painful. If they had said they were having a tiny ceremony with only parents and the wedding party, I could have understood. If they had eloped or cited budget constraints, I could have accepted that. But being told that I didn't fit the visual requirements for their wedding photos was a level of rejection that I had never experienced. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, trying to see what Brandon and Stephanie saw when they looked at me. I was shorter than Stephanie's statuesque friends, with dark curly hair instead of straight blonde locks. I wasn't conventionally thin, though I was healthy and active. Was this really what disqualified me from attending my own brother's wedding? The phone rang again 20 minutes later. It was my mother. "Emma, honey, Brandon told me he called you about the wedding. I know this might seem confusing, but I hope you can understand that this is Stephanie's special day." And there it was, confirmation that my own parents had not only known about my exclusion, but had approved of it. The call with my mother that evening would prove to be even more devastating than the conversation with Brandon. When Margaret's name appeared on my phone screen just 30 minutes after I had hung up with my brother, I foolishly hoped she was calling to express outrage at the situation, or to tell me that she had convinced Brandon to reconsider. Instead, her opening words confirmed my worst fears about how deep this betrayal ran and how alone I was in my own family. Emma, sweetheart, I know Brandon's news about the wedding planning must have been disappointing to hear, but I hope you can understand that Stephanie has very specific ideas about her special day, and we want to support their vision.
The careful, diplomatic tone in her voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous decision that had caught my parents off guard. They had been part of the planning process, part of the discussions about guest lists and aesthetics, part of the decision to exclude their own daughter.
Mom, are you seriously telling me that you think it's okay for Brandon to not invite me to his wedding because I don't look right in the photos? Margaret sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she did when she was trying to find the right words for a difficult conversation. Honey, it's not about how you look. It's about Stephanie having the wedding she's always dreamed of. She's put so much thought into every detail, and we want to respect her wishes. Her wishes to exclude me from my own brother's wedding? Emma, please try to understand. Stephanie comes from a family where appearances and social presentation are very important. Her parents are prominent in their community, and this wedding is going to be quite an event. She's under a lot of pressure to make everything perfect. The suggestion that Stephanie's family's social expectations somehow justified my exclusion made my stomach turn. So their social standing is more important than including your daughter in the family? That's not what I'm saying at all. You're being dramatic about this, Emra. It's one day, and there will be plenty of other opportunities for family celebrations. The casual dismissal of my hurt as dramatic was like a slap in the face. I had never been one to overreact or create unnecessary drama, and my mother knew that. For her to characterize my devastation as theatrics felt like a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was as a person. As our conversation continued, more painful details emerged. Margaret revealed that she and Robert had been involved in guest list discussions for weeks. They had seen the wedding planner's mood boards and aesthetic guidelines. They had participated in conversations about maintaining visual consistency throughout the event. And they had agreed that honoring Stephanie's vision was the priority. What about Aunt Linda and Uncle Steve? I asked, remembering Brandon's mention that extended family would be attending. Do they fit Stephanie's aesthetic better than I do? Margaret's pause told me she hadn't expected that question. Well, they're older family members, so the considerations are different, and Stephanie has met them several times and feels comfortable including them. She's met me dozens of times over 3 years, Mom. It's not about comfort level, Emma. It's about the overall composition of the guest list and the photos. Stephanie has shown us examples from magazines of how she wants everything to look, and there's a certain harmony that she's trying to achieve. The word harmony stung almost as much as Brandon's earlier use of cohesive. My own mother was describing my presence as somehow discordant with the family celebration. Over the following days, I found myself analyzing every family interaction from the past 3 years, looking for signs I had missed. The clues were there, subtle but consistent, and I realized I had been unconsciously minimizing them to preserve my sense of family unity. There was Christmas 2 years ago when Stephanie had suggested we hire a professional photographer for family portraits instead of using the timer on our camera. The resulting photos were beautiful and formal, but when I looked at them now, I could see how I stood out. Shorter, rounder, less polished than everyone else in the frame. I remembered the comments Stephanie had made about my apartment during her visits, delivered with a smile but carrying an undertone of judgment. "Oh, how eclectic," she had said about my decorating style. "You're so brave to mix so many different patterns." At the time, I had taken it as a compliment about my creativity. Now I realized she had been cataloging everything that didn't meet her standards. There were the conversations during family dinners where Stephanie would steer discussions toward topics that highlighted the differences between her lifestyle and mine. She would talk about the exclusive gym she belonged to, the high-end skincare treatment she received, or the designer clothing she had purchased, always in a way that seemed informational rather than boastful. But the subtext was clear. These were the standards that mattered in her world. Most painfully, I began to remember moments when Brandon had seemed to echo Stephanie's perspectives. The time he had suggested I might want to invest in some professional pieces for my wardrobe. The casual comment about how I might look better with highlights in my hair. The way that he had started referring to my lifestyle as comfortable in a tone that suggested comfort was somehow less desirable than aspiration. The next revelation came from an unexpected source. My cousin Michael, Uncle Steve's son, called me 3 days after the initial phone call from Brandon. Michael and I had always been close, sharing a love of books and hiking, and he often sought my advice about his own teaching career. "Emma, I have to tell you something that's been bothering me," he began without preamble. "My parents got their wedding invitation for Brandon and Stephanie's wedding yesterday, and when I asked about plus ones, my mom mentioned that you weren't going to be there. She said something about you having a conflict that weekend." My heart sunk. The lies were already spreading through the family, creating a false narrative about why I wouldn't be attending my own brother's wedding. "There's no conflict, Michael. They didn't invite me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "What do you mean they didn't invite you? You're his twin sister."
As I explained the situation to Michael, I could hear his shock and disbelief. "That's insane, Emma. Absolutely insane. What reason could they possibly have for not inviting you?" When I told him about the aesthetic concerns and the need for visual harmony in the photos, Michael's response was immediate and fierce. "That's the most superficial, horrible thing I've ever heard. I can't believe Brandon would go along with something like that." Michael's outrage on my behalf was validating, but it also highlighted how alone I was within my immediate family. The people who should have been most protective of my feelings, my parents and my twin brother, had instead prioritized the comfort and preferences of someone who had known me for only 3 years. "Have you talked to other family members about this?" Michael asked. "Just my parents, and they're supporting Brandon and Stephanie's decision." "Emma, I think people need to know what's really happening here. The story that's being told is that you can't make it due to scheduling conflicts. Nobody knows that you were actually excluded." That conversation planted a seed that would grow over the following weeks. The realization that my family was actively lying about the reasons for my absence felt like a deeper violation than the original exclusion. They weren't just rejecting me, they were rewriting the narrative to protect their own reputations while making me complicit in the deception. I spent the next week in a haze of hurt and confusion, mechanically going through the motions of my daily routine while trying to process what had happened. My students noticed that I seemed distracted, and several of them asked if I was feeling okay. Their genuine concern was touching, but it also highlighted how my 10-year-old students treated me and how my own family had handled the situation. The breaking point came when I received a text message from Brandon that felt like the final insult. "Hey, Em, Stephanie and I were talking, and we'd love for you to help coordinate the welcome dinner for out-of-town guests the Friday before the wedding. You're so good at organizing events, and it would be a great way for you to be involved. Let me know if you're interested." The suggestion that I should help plan pre-wedding events for a wedding I wasn't invited to attend was so tone-deaf that I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Then I started crying. The fact that Brandon could send such a message suggested he truly didn't understand the depth of hurt he had caused, or worse, that he understood but didn't care. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my family relationships. Had I been naive about how much I mattered to them? Had I misinterpreted years of interactions, seeing love and acceptance where there was actually tolerance and mild affection? Were there other family members who secretly viewed me as somehow inadequate or embarrassing? The physical symptoms of stress began manifesting in ways I had never experienced before. I had trouble sleeping, lost my appetite, and found myself crying at unexpected moments throughout the day.
During one particularly difficult evening, I sat in my apartment looking at family photos spanning decades, trying to understand how I had become someone whose presence was seen as detrimental to a family celebration. My friend Jessica, a fellow teacher who had become one of my closest confidants, noticed my distress during a staff meeting and insisted on taking me out for dinner that Friday evening. Over Thai food and wine, I told her the entire story, expecting her to offer gentle consolation and advice about family harmony. Instead, Jessica's reaction was volcanic. "Are you kidding me? They excluded you from your brother's wedding because you're not blonde and skinny enough for the photos? Emma, this is beyond cruel. This is abusive." The word abusive startled me. I had been thinking of the situation as hurtful and unfair, but Jessica's perspective reframed it in a way that made me see the dynamics more clearly. "Think about it," she continued. "They made a deliberate decision to exclude you based on your physical appearance. They coordinated this exclusion with your parents, and now they're asking you to work as unpaid help for the events you're banned from attending. That's not family dysfunction, Emma. That's a systematic devaluation of your worth as a person." Jessica's clarity cut through the fog of hurt and confusion I had been carrying. She was right. This wasn't about wedding planning complications or budget constraints or even personality conflicts. This was about my family deciding that my physical appearance made me unsuitable for their celebration and then expecting me to accept that judgment gracefully. "What are you going to do about it?" Jessica asked. For the first time since Brandon's call, I felt something other than hurt and confusion. I felt a spark of anger, and under that anger, a growing determination that I wasn't going to accept this treatment quietly. The plan that began forming in my mind that evening was still vague, but it was fueled by a new understanding of my own worth and a refusal to be diminished by people who claimed to love me. The weekend after my conversation with Jessica marked a turning point in how I approached the entire situation. Instead of continuing to absorb the hurt and hoping for some kind of family reconciliation, I decided to take control of my own narrative. If my family had chosen to exclude me from their celebration, I would create something so meaningful and beautiful that their decision would be revealed as the shallow, hurtful mistake it truly was.
Saturday morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began researching something I had never seriously considered before: planning my own celebration for the same weekend as Brandon's wedding. Not as a spite-filled counter-event, but as a genuine celebration of the relationships and values that actually mattered to me. The inspiration came from remembering something my grandmother used to say before she passed away when I was 15. "Emma," she would tell me, "when people show you who they really are, believe them, but more importantly, show them who you really are." Grandma Rose had been the kind of person who could find something to celebrate in the smallest moments, who made everyone feel valued and included, and who believed that joy was something you created rather than something that happened to you. My first step was to identify what I actually wanted to celebrate. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Brandon's wedding weekend could be an opportunity to honor everything his celebration was rejecting: authenticity over appearance, inclusion over exclusivity, genuine relationships over social networking. I began envisioning a gathering that would showcase the life I had built and the people who truly valued me for who I was. The guest list practically wrote itself. I started with my closest friends from teaching, Jessica, obviously, but also Maria from the second grade team, who had become like a sister to me, David from fourth grade, who shared my love of hiking and always made me laugh, and Sarah from kindergarten, who had supported me through every challenge of the past 5 years. These were people who had seen me at my best and worst, who celebrated my successes genuinely and offered comfort during difficulties without judgment. I added friends from my book club, women ranging in age from 25 to 65, who gathered monthly to discuss literature, but had evolved into a support network that enriched all of our lives. There was Patricia, a retired librarian who mentored new teachers; Allison, a social worker who brought perspective and wisdom to every conversation; and Jennifer, a small business owner whose creativity and resilience inspired everyone around her.
From my theater group, I included the core team of volunteers who had become genuine friends over the past 3 years. These were people who understood the joy of creating something beautiful together, who appreciated different talents and perspectives, and who had taught me that the most meaningful productions were those where everyone felt valued and essential. The list grew to include neighbors who had become friends, former colleagues who stayed in touch, and even a few of my former students who were now in high school and had maintained contact with me over the years. By the time I finished, I had identified 38 people who genuinely enriched my life and who I knew would celebrate with authenticity and joy. The vision for the celebration began taking shape as I researched venues and possibilities. Instead of trying to compete with the luxury and formality of Brandon's wedding, I decided to lean into everything that made my life meaningful: creativity, community, and genuine connection. I found the perfect location in Riverside Park, where there was a beautiful pavilion that could be reserved for private events, surrounded by gardens and walking trails that I had enjoyed for years. The timing presented an interesting opportunity. Brandon's wedding was scheduled for Saturday evening in Napa Valley, about 2 hours from Sacramento. Most of our extended family would be traveling there Friday afternoon for the weekend-long celebration. This meant I could host my own celebration on Saturday afternoon without any risk of awkward encounters or having to explain my presence to family members who believed I was dealing with a scheduling conflict. I spent Sunday afternoon walking through Riverside Park, visualizing how the celebration could unfold. The pavilion was large enough to accommodate my guest list comfortably, with beautiful natural lighting and views of the river. There were grassy areas perfect for lawn games, walking paths for people who wanted quieter conversations, and a playground nearby where any families with children could feel welcome. The setting embodied everything I loved about Sacramento: natural beauty, community accessibility, and an atmosphere that encouraged genuine interaction rather than performative socializing. The planning process became unexpectedly therapeutic. Instead of dwelling on my exclusion from Brandon's wedding, I found myself energized by the opportunity to create something that reflected my own values and priorities. I researched local caterers who specialized in fresh, seasonal food rather than formal plated dinners. I contacted the string quartet that performed at community events, musicians who brought skill and passion to their performances without pretension. I explored options for activities that would encourage interaction and celebration, everything from a collaborative art station to lawn games to a photo booth with props that would make people laugh rather than pose. The budget considerations required creativity, but not sacrifice. Teaching didn't provide unlimited resources, but I had been saving money for a summer trip to Europe that I could postpone. More importantly, many of the people I was inviting offered to contribute in ways that reflected their own talents and interests. Jessica volunteered to create centerpieces using flowers from her garden. Maria offered to coordinate food assignments potluck style, which would actually create more variety and personal touches. David suggested organizing hiking groups for people who wanted to explore the park's trails before the main celebration began. As the planning progressed, I realized I was creating something much more meaningful than a response to rejection. This celebration was becoming an affirmation of the life I had built and the relationships I had cultivated. Every detail reflected genuine aspects of my personality and values rather than trying to meet external expectations or social standards. The invitation design process became particularly meaningful. Instead of formal wedding-style announcements, I created personalized notes for each guest, explaining why their friendship mattered to me and what I hoped we could celebrate together. The messages were handwritten, specific, and focused on individual relationships rather than a general event announcement.
Several people called after receiving their invitations, expressing how touched they were by the personal messages and how excited they were to be part of the celebration. Word of the gathering began spreading organically through my various social circles. People who weren't initially on my guest list heard about the celebration and asked if they could attend, not because it was an exclusive event they wanted to access, but because the concept of celebrating authentic relationships and community connection resonated with them. I found myself adding names to the list as friends mentioned colleagues or neighbors who embodied the values we were celebrating. The most unexpected development came from my cousin Michael, who called the Wednesday before the wedding weekend with surprising news. Emma, I've been thinking about this whole situation with Brandon's wedding, and I've decided I'm not going to attend. I was shocked. Michael had been invited, was planning to attend, and had seemed genuinely outraged on my behalf without suggesting he would take any action himself. Michael, you don't need to boycott the wedding because of me. That's not what I want. It's not about boycotting anything, he replied. It's about choosing where I want to spend my time and what kind of events I want to support with my presence. When I think about celebrating family relationships, I want to be somewhere that actually honors those relationships rather than somewhere that treats family members as decorative accessories. He paused before continuing. Plus, honestly, your celebration sounds like it's going to be a lot more fun and meaningful than sitting through a formal wedding where everything is choreographed for social media posts. Michael's decision to attend my celebration instead of Brandon's wedding felt like external validation that I was creating something worthwhile rather than just responding to hurt feelings. His choice also meant that at least one family member would know firsthand what Brandon and Stephanie had chosen to miss by excluding me. The final piece of my plan involved documentation, though not in the way that Stephanie was approaching her wedding photography. Instead of hiring a professional photographer to capture posed perfection, I arranged for Jennifer from my book club, who was an amateur photographer with genuine skill, to take candid photos throughout the celebration. The goal wasn't to create magazine-worthy images, but to capture authentic moments of joy, connection, and community. I also planned to create a memory book where guests could write messages, share favorite memories of our friendships, or simply express what community and inclusion meant to them. This book would become a tangible reminder of the values being celebrated and the relationships that truly mattered in my life. By Thursday evening, everything was in place. The pavilion was reserved, food assignments were distributed, activities were planned, and 38 people were excited to gather for a celebration of authentic relationships and genuine community. Weather forecasts predicted perfect September weather, sunny and warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that would make outdoor activities comfortable. As I reviewed my planning checklist that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Brandon's initial phone call: genuine excitement about the weekend ahead. Win or lose in terms of family dynamics, I was about to spend Saturday afternoon surrounded by people who valued me exactly as I was, celebrating everything that made life meaningful and joyful. The irony wasn't lost on me that being excluded from one celebration had led to creating something much more aligned with my own values and desires. Brandon's rejection had forced me to examine what I actually wanted to celebrate and with whom I wanted to share meaningful moments. The result was an event that would be more authentically me than any role I might have played in his formal, aesthetically controlled wedding. Saturday morning would arrive with perfect weather, eager guests, and an opportunity to demonstrate that worth isn't determined by who includes you, but by what you choose to create when you include yourself. Saturday morning dawned with the kind of perfect September weather that felt like nature's endorsement of my celebration. I woke up at sunrise, not from anxiety, but from genuine excitement about the day ahead. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely aligned with my choices and confident in the path I had taken. The setup at Riverside Park began at 9 in the morning, with volunteers arriving in waves to help transform the pavilion into something magical. Jessica arrived first with her car full of garden flowers arranged in mason jars, creating centerpieces that were both beautiful and unpretentious. Maria followed with her carefully coordinated potluck assignments, bringing a variety of dishes that represented the diverse tastes and cultures of our friend group. David arrived with games and activities, setting up croquet on the lawn area and arranging a nature scavenger hunt for anyone who wanted to explore the park's trails. Patricia from the book club brought a portable sound system and a carefully curated playlist that mixed upbeat celebration music with acoustic songs that would encourage conversation rather than overwhelm it. As we worked together to prepare the space, I was struck by how natural and joyful the process felt. Unlike the stress and precision that I imagined was happening at Brandon's wedding venue, our setup was collaborative, flexible, and filled with laughter. When Jennifer's flower arrangement was slightly lopsided, we laughed and adjusted it together. When David realized we needed more tables, 3 people immediately offered solutions. The spirit of cooperation and mutual support set the tone for everything that would follow. By 11 o'clock, the pavilion had been transformed into something that perfectly captured my vision. The space felt warm and welcoming, with natural beauty enhanced rather than controlled. Tables were arranged to encourage mingling, with no head table or formal seating assignments. The food stations offered variety and abundance without pretension. Activity areas were scattered throughout the space, allowing people to engage at their own comfort level and interest.
The first guests began arriving around noon, and the energy was immediately different from any formal event I had attended. People hugged enthusiastically, complimented the setting with genuine appreciation, and immediately began engaging with the activities and each other. There was no awkward reception line or formal introductions, just friends gathering to celebrate friendship and community. One of the most touching early moments came when Allison, from the book club, arrived with her teenage daughter, Maya, who had specifically asked to attend after hearing about the celebration. Maya had struggled with social anxiety and self-esteem issues, and Allison had thought the inclusive, judgment-free atmosphere might be encouraging for her. Watching Maya immediately feel comfortable and begin participating in activities reinforced everything I had hoped to create with this gathering. The string quartet arrived at 1 o'clock and began playing near the pavilion, adding beautiful background music that enhanced conversations rather than dominating them. Their repertoire included classical pieces mixed with folk songs and even some popular music arranged for strings, creating an atmosphere that was sophisticated but accessible. Around 2 o'clock, as the celebration was reaching its peak energy, Michael arrived with news that would add an unexpected dimension to the afternoon. He had driven directly from Napa Valley, where he had briefly attended Brandon's wedding ceremony before leaving for Sacramento. "Emma, I need to tell you what happened this morning," he said, pulling me aside for a private conversation. The wedding was exactly what you would expect. Beautiful, formal, completely focused on appearances. But there were some developments that I think you should know about. He explained that several family members had been asking questions about my absence throughout the morning festivities. Despite the official story about scheduling conflicts, people had begun wondering why my own twin brother's wedding would be scheduled during a time when I couldn't attend. The questions had become increasingly uncomfortable for my parents and Brandon. Aunt Linda was particularly vocal about it. She kept saying how strange it was that you weren't there and how much she missed seeing you. When Uncle Steve mentioned that your teaching schedule shouldn't conflict with weekend events, things got awkward fast. The situation had reached a breaking point during the formal photography session before the ceremony. The photographer had been arranging family groupings according to Stephanie's detailed instructions, and several relatives had asked why I wasn't included in the sibling photos. Brandon had attempted to explain my absence, but his explanations were becoming increasingly unconvincing. Finally, Aunt Linda just asked directly if there had been some kind of family conflict. The silence was so uncomfortable that people started figuring out something was seriously wrong. The real confrontation had occurred when my cousin Jennifer, Uncle Steve's daughter who lived in Los Angeles, arrived late to the ceremony and immediately asked about my whereabouts. Jennifer was a successful photographer herself who had followed my teaching career and personal life through social media, and she knew I would never miss Brandon's wedding for trivial reasons. When Jennifer pressed for details about your scheduling conflict, Brandon finally admitted that they had made difficult decisions about the guest list. But when she asked for specifics, Stephanie stepped in and said something about maintaining aesthetic consistency for the photography. According to Michael, Jennifer's reaction had been immediate and fierce. She said, "Are you telling me that Emma isn't here because she doesn't look right for your photos?" The question was loud enough that several people heard it, and the atmosphere became extremely tense. The situation had escalated when Jennifer announced that she was leaving the wedding immediately, stating that she couldn't support an event that excluded family members based on appearance. 2 other cousins had followed her lead, creating a small but noticeable exodus that cast a shadow over the pre-ceremony festivities.
Emma, there are family members right now who are seriously questioning what kind of people Brandon and Stephanie are, Michael concluded. Your absence is being felt more powerfully than your presence probably would have been. This news added an unexpected layer to my own celebration. While I planned the gathering as a positive affirmation of my values rather than a response to rejection, knowing that my exclusion was creating consequences for Brandon and Stephanie felt like validation that other people recognized the wrongness of their decision. The afternoon continued with increasing energy and joy. The collaborative art station became particularly popular, with guests creating a large canvas together that incorporated handprints, messages, and small drawings. The finished piece would serve as a permanent reminder of the community we had built and celebrated together. The memory book that I had planned as a simple guest registry evolved into something much more meaningful. People began writing detailed messages about friendship, inclusion, and the importance of authentic relationships. Some shared personal stories about times when they had felt excluded and how much it meant to find communities that truly welcomed them. Others wrote about what my friendship had meant to them and why they were honored to be part of the celebration.
Around 4 o'clock, Patricia from the book club proposed a toast that perfectly captured the spirit of the afternoon. Standing in the pavilion with everyone gathered around, she raised her glass and said, "To Emma, who has shown us that when others fail to recognize your worth, the answer isn't to diminish yourself, it's to shine brighter and create space for others to shine with you." The spontaneous applause and cheers that followed felt like a moment of collective recognition that we had created something special together. This wasn't just a party or a social gathering, it was a celebration of values and relationships that mattered deeply to everyone present. The most unexpected moment came around 5 o'clock when my phone began buzzing with text messages from extended family members. Word of the confrontation at Brandon's wedding had spread, and several relatives were reaching out to express their support and to ask about my celebration. Cousin Jennifer texted first, "Michael told me about your gathering today. I'm so proud of you for creating something positive. Can I come by if I drive up from the wedding?" Then Aunt Linda, "Sweetheart, I'm learning some things about today that are very upsetting. I hope you know how much you are loved and valued by this family." Even my father sent a brief message. "Emma, there seem to be some misunderstandings about today. We should talk soon." The messages created a surreal situation where my celebration was receiving real-time updates about the fallout from the event I had been excluded from. Instead of feeling vindicated or satisfied by Brandon's discomfort, I found myself feeling sad about how unnecessarily painful the entire situation had become for everyone involved. The contrast between the two celebrations was stark and telling. While Brandon's wedding was apparently dealing with family conflict, uncomfortable questions, and early departures, my gathering was filled with genuine joy, meaningful connections, and organic expressions of love and support. The difference highlighted everything that had been wrong with prioritizing appearance over authenticity. As the afternoon moved toward evening, several guests mentioned that they didn't want the celebration to end. The connections being made and renewed felt too valuable to conclude on schedule. We decided to transition into a more casual evening gathering, with people staying as long as they wanted and activities continuing organically. Jennifer, my cousin from Los Angeles, arrived just before sunset, still wearing her formal wedding attire, but immediately joining the relaxed atmosphere of our celebration. Her presence created a direct link between the two events happening simultaneously, and her stories about the morning's tensions provided context for the text messages I had been receiving. "Emma, what you've created here is everything that was missing from Brandon's wedding," she said as we walked along the river together. "This feels like a real celebration of relationships and community. The other event felt like a performance." The evening concluded with an impromptu circle where people shared reflections about the day and what the celebration had meant to them. The comments were consistently focused on feelings of inclusion, authentic connection, and gratitude for being part of something meaningful. Several people mentioned that they felt inspired to create similar gatherings in their own lives, focused on celebrating genuine relationships rather than meeting social expectations.
As cleanup began around 8 o'clock, with volunteers working together just as joyfully as they had during setup, I realized that my response to exclusion had created something far more valuable than attendance at Brandon's wedding would have been. The celebration had demonstrated my values, strengthened my relationships, and created new connections that would continue long after the weekend ended. The day had also revealed the true consequences of Brandon and Stephanie's decision. While I was surrounded by people who celebrated my authentic self, they were dealing with family conflict and public questioning of their values. The contrast couldn't have been more clear or more satisfying. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because truth had ultimately prevailed over pretense. Sunday morning brought an avalanche of phone calls, text messages, and unexpected visitors that would reshape my family relationships permanently. I woke up feeling peaceful and fulfilled from the previous day's celebration, but within an hour of getting out of bed, it became clear that the consequences of Brandon's wedding were still unfolding in ways no one had anticipated. The first call came from Aunt Linda at 8:30 in the morning. Her voice was tight with controlled anger, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to tell me exactly what happened with Brandon's wedding invitation. I've been getting conflicting stories, and I want to hear the truth directly from you." I explained the situation honestly, including the reasons Brandon and Stephanie had given for excluding me. Aunt Linda's silence during my explanation was more telling than any outburst could have been. "So, let me understand this correctly," she said when I finished. "My nephew excluded his twin sister from his wedding because she didn't fit the aesthetic they wanted for their photographs, and then they lied to the entire family about why you weren't there?" That's an accurate summary.
Aunt Linda's response was swift and decisive. "Emma, I'm driving up to Sacramento this afternoon to see you in person, and I want you to know that your uncle and I have decided to return our wedding gift and send them a letter explaining exactly why we're doing so." The call with Aunt Linda was followed by similar conversations with other family members who had attended the wedding and were now processing what they had witnessed. The story of the confrontation with cousin Jennifer had spread rapidly through the family network, and people were reaching out to get my side of the story before making their own decisions about how to respond. Uncle Steve called an hour later, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Emma, I owe you an apology. I should have questioned the story about your scheduling conflict from the beginning. It never made sense that you would miss Brandon's wedding for work obligations." He went on to explain that several family members were now reconsidering their relationships with Brandon and Stephanie based on what they had learned. The way they handled the situation reveals something fundamental about their character, and it's not something most of us want to support or enable. The most surprising call came from my father around 10 o'clock. Robert's voice was strained, and he sounded like he had been awake all night wrestling with difficult realizations. "Emma, I need to talk to you about yesterday. There are things that happened at the wedding that have made me reconsider some of the choices your mother and I made regarding the situation." He explained that the family confrontations during the wedding had forced him to see the exclusion from an outside perspective for the first time. When Jennifer asked those direct questions about aesthetic consistency, I heard how it sounded to people who weren't involved in the planning process. It sounded cruel and shallow, because that's exactly what it was. My father's admission that he had been wrong was unprecedented in our family dynamics. Robert had always been the authority figure who made decisions and expected them to be respected without question. Hearing him acknowledge a mistake and express regret felt like a fundamental shift in our relationship. I'm not calling to make excuses. I'm calling to acknowledge that we failed you as parents and to ask if you would be willing to meet with your mother and me to discuss how we can rebuild the trust that we damaged. The conversation with my father was emotional and difficult, but it also felt like the beginning of a new kind of relationship based on honesty rather than automatic deference to parental authority. For the first time in my adult life, he was speaking to me as an equal who deserved respect and consideration, rather than as a child who should accept decisions made by others.
Around noon, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret arrived at my apartment, looking exhausted and defeated, carrying a large envelope that contained printed photos from Brandon's wedding. She had driven directly from Napa Valley without calling ahead, and her appearance suggested she had spent the night crying. "Emma, I need to show you something," she said, settling into my living room with the envelope. "These are some of the photos from yesterday's reception, and I think they'll help you understand what really happened." The photos she showed me were technically beautiful, but emotionally cold. Every image looked like it could have been pulled from a wedding magazine, perfectly posed, flawlessly lit, with every person positioned for maximum visual impact. Brandon and Stephanie looked like models rather than a couple celebrating their love. And the family photos had the artificial perfection of professional headshots. "Look at these faces, Emma," Margaret said, pointing to the extended family members in the group shots. "Everyone looks uncomfortable and formal. There's no joy, no genuine emotion, just people performing for the camera." She then pulled out her phone and showed me some candid photos that cousin Jennifer had taken during my celebration the previous afternoon. The contrast was stark and immediate. Where Brandon's wedding photos showed aesthetic perfection, my celebration photos captured authentic happiness. People were laughing, hugging, engaging naturally with each other. The beauty came from genuine emotion rather than staged positioning. "I spent yesterday watching your brother and Stephanie manage their guests like props for a photo shoot. Everything was about how it would look rather than how it would feel. And I realized that we had sacrificed the most important person in the family for something completely meaningless." My mother's acknowledgement of the mistake was even more significant than my father's, because she had been the primary advocate for supporting Stephanie's vision. Her willingness to admit that the entire approach had been wrong represented a complete reversal of her previous position. "I also need to tell you about the conversation your father and I had with Brandon and Stephanie after the reception last night. When we confronted them about the family members who had left early and the questions that were being asked, their response was troubling. According to Margaret, Brandon and Stephanie had been defensive and dismissive when questioned about the fallout from my exclusion. Instead of acknowledging that they might have made a mistake, they had blamed the family members who left for being dramatic and unsupportive. Stephanie had specifically complained that people were ruining her perfect day by focusing on someone who wasn't even there.
"That response told us everything we needed to know about who they really are," Margaret said. "They showed no remorse, no understanding of why people were upset, and no willingness to take responsibility for the hurt they had caused." The final revelation came when Margaret showed me a text message thread between Brandon and some of his college friends who had attended the wedding. In the messages, which someone had forwarded to my parents, Brandon referred to the family drama as typical Emma behavior and suggested that I had somehow orchestrated the confrontations to sabotage his wedding day. "He's actually trying to blame you for the consequences of his own decisions," Margaret said, her voice shaking with anger. "That level of deflection and refusal to accept responsibility is not something your father and I can support." The transformation in my parents' perspective was complete and permanent. They had moved from supporting Brandon's decision to exclude me to recognizing that their son and daughter-in-law had revealed character flaws that were fundamentally incompatible with family values of love, inclusion, and mutual respect. Around 3 o'clock, Aunt Linda arrived as promised, accompanied by Uncle Steve and Cousin Jennifer. They had driven up together to offer their support and to discuss how the family should respond to what had happened. The conversation that followed was unlike any family meeting I had ever experienced. "Emma, we want you to know that what happened yesterday was not representative of this family's values," Aunt Linda began. "And we want to make sure that there are consequences for Brandon and Stephanie's behavior that make it clear such treatment of family members will not be tolerated." The group had already made several decisions. They were returning their wedding gifts with letters explaining their reasons. They were planning to host their own family gathering, specifically to honor inclusion and authentic relationships, with me as the guest of honor. Most significantly, they were establishing new boundaries with Brandon and Stephanie that would remain in place until genuine apologies and changed behavior demonstrated real remorse. "We're not trying to punish them forever," Uncle Steve explained, "but we are making it clear that excluding family members based on appearance is unacceptable, and that lying about the reasons for exclusion makes the behavior even worse." Jennifer added her own perspective as someone who had witnessed both events. "Emma, your celebration yesterday was everything a family gathering should be. It was inclusive, authentic, and focused on relationships rather than appearances. The contrast between Brandon's wedding couldn't have been more obvious." The afternoon concluded with concrete plans for rebuilding family relationships on healthier foundations. My parents committed to family therapy to address the enabling behavior that had allowed the situation to develop. The extended family planned regular gatherings that would prioritize inclusion and authentic connection over formal presentations. Most importantly, everyone acknowledged that I had been wronged and deserved not just apologies, but changed behavior going forward. The vindication I felt wasn't about being proven right or watching others face consequences. It was about having my worth recognized and affirmed by people who mattered to me. The family members who had rallied to my support had demonstrated that real family relationships are built on love and acceptance, rather than conditional approval based on meeting arbitrary standards. By evening, it was clear that Brandon and Stephanie's decision to exclude me had backfired completely. Instead of removing someone who didn't fit their aesthetic vision, they had revealed their own character flaws to the entire family and lost the respect and support of the people who mattered most. Their perfect wedding photos would serve as a permanent reminder of the relationships they had damaged in pursuit of superficial ideals. The most satisfying aspect of the entire resolution was that it had happened naturally and organically. I hadn't campaigned against Brandon and Stephanie or tried to turn family members against them. I had simply created something positive and authentic, and the contrast had made their behavior impossible to defend or ignore. The celebration I had planned as a response to exclusion had become the foundation for rebuilding family relationships based on genuine values. The community I had created around acceptance and inclusion had demonstrated what was possible when people prioritized character over appearance, authenticity over performance, and love over status. Looking back at the photos from my celebration, surrounded by people who valued me exactly as I was, I realized that being excluded from Brandon's wedding had been the catalyst for something much more meaningful than anything I would have experienced as a reluctant guest at an event that fundamentally rejected my worth as a person. 1 year later, as I sit in my classroom decorating bulletin boards for the new school year, I often reflect on how profoundly that devastating phone call from Brandon changed the trajectory of my life. What began as the most painful rejection I had ever experienced became the catalyst for the most empowering transformation I could have imagined. The immediate aftermath of that September weekend continued to unfold in ways that reinforced every decision I had made. Brandon and Stephanie's marriage, built on a foundation of superficial values and social performance, began showing cracks almost immediately. The family members who had distanced themselves from them maintained those boundaries, creating a social isolation that Stephanie, in particular, struggled to understand or accept. Within 3 months of the wedding, Brandon reached out through our father, asking if I would be willing to meet with him privately. The conversation we had in December was unlike any interaction we had shared since childhood. For the first time in years, Brandon spoke to me without the filter of trying to impress someone else or manage someone else's expectations.
Emma,
I need you to know that I've realized how wrong I was, he said during our awkward coffee meeting. Not just about the wedding, but about everything that led up to it. I let someone else's values override my own judgment, and I hurt the person who mattered most to me. His apology was genuine, but complicated. Brandon acknowledged that he had been influenced by Stephanie's priorities to the point where he had lost sight of his own principles. He admitted that the wedding had felt more like a performance than a celebration, and that the family conflicts had overshadowed what should have been the happiest day of his life. However, the damage to our relationship couldn't be easily repaired. Trust, once broken so fundamentally, required more than acknowledgement and regret. I appreciated his apology, but I also understood that rebuilding our connection would be a long process that depended on consistent changed behavior rather than single conversations. The most significant transformation occurred within my own sense of self-worth and independence. Being forced to create my own validation rather than seeking it from family approval had fundamentally shifted how I approached relationships and opportunities. I no longer waited for others to recognize my value before acting on my own behalf. This newfound confidence influenced every aspect of my life. At school, I began proposing innovative programs and teaching methods that I had previously hesitated to suggest. My principal noticed the change in my assertiveness and leadership qualities, leading to opportunities to mentor new teachers and eventually to a promotion to curriculum coordinator. In my personal life, I started pursuing interests and relationships based solely on my own desires, rather than on how they might be perceived by others. I joined a hiking club that organized weekend adventures to national parks, started taking pottery classes that I had always wanted to try, and even began dating again with a clearer understanding of what I actually valued in a partner. The community I had built around that September celebration continued to thrive and grow. The connections made that day evolved into a support network that organized regular gatherings, helped each other through personal challenges, and celebrated achievements together. What had started as a response to exclusion became an ongoing model for authentic relationships. Several of the teachers from my celebration approached me about organizing similar events in their own lives. The concept of celebrating genuine relationships rather than meeting social expectations resonated with people who had felt pressure to conform to others' definitions of success and happiness. I found myself becoming an informal mentor to friends who were learning to prioritize authenticity over approval. The lessons I learned extended far beyond family dynamics into fundamental questions about self-worth and validation. I discovered that seeking approval from people who don't value your authentic self is not just futile, but destructive. The energy I had spent trying to fit into Brandon and Stephanie's vision could be much better invested in building relationships with people who appreciated me as I was. I also learned that creating your own opportunities for celebration and recognition is not selfish or defensive. It's essential. Waiting for others to acknowledge your worth or include you in their definitions of success gives them control of your happiness and self-perception. Taking that control back is one of the most empowering decisions anyone can make. The contrast between superficial values and authentic connections became a guiding principle in all my relationships. I learned to identify people who were more concerned with appearances than substance, and to invest my emotional energy in connections that were based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than social networking or status enhancement. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that family relationships, like all relationships, must be built on foundations of respect and inclusion. Blood relationships don't exempt people from treating each other with basic decency, and loyalty shouldn't require accepting treatment that undermines your self-worth. The photography project that Jennifer had documented during my celebration became something much more meaningful than simple event documentation. The images captured authentic joy, genuine connections, and natural beauty in ways that highlighted everything missing from Brandon's formal wedding photos. I created a photo album that serves as a permanent reminder of what celebration should feel like when it's based on love rather than performance. My relationship with my parents evolved into something healthier and more honest than it had ever been. The family therapy sessions we attended together addressed not just the wedding situation, but patterns of enabling and conflict avoidance that had influenced our family dynamics for years.
Margaret and Robert learned to express support without requiring conformity, and I learned to set boundaries without feeling guilty about disappointing them. The extended family relationships that were strengthened through the crisis became some of the most valuable connections in my life. Aunt Linda, Uncle Steve, and cousins Jennifer and Michael became regular sources of support and celebration, demonstrating that chosen family can be just as important as biological family when it comes to feeling valued and accepted. As for Brandon and Stephanie, their marriage lasted less than 2 years. The same superficial values that led to my exclusion from their wedding created ongoing conflicts about money, social status, and family relationships that they were unable to resolve. Their divorce was finalized this past spring, with Stephanie returning to Los Angeles and Brandon moving back to Sacramento to rebuild relationships with the family he had alienated. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that the perfect aesthetic they had prioritized for their wedding photos outlasted their actual marriage by only a few months. Those magazine-worthy images became symbols of everything that was wrong with their approach to relationships and life priorities.
When people ask me how I recovered from such a painful family betrayal, I tell them that recovery wasn't the right word. Transformation was more accurate. The experience didn't just help me heal from the hurt, it helped me discover strength, independence, and self-worth that I didn't know I possessed. The celebration I created in response to exclusion has become an annual tradition, growing larger each year as more people learn about the concept of celebrating authentic relationships. This year's gathering will include nearly 60 people who have found community around the values of inclusion, acceptance, and genuine connection. I've learned that when people show you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. But more importantly, use their revelation as an opportunity to show yourself and others who you really are. Sometimes the most empowering response to rejection is not to fight for inclusion in spaces that don't value you, but to create spaces that do. The phone call that shattered my world that October evening ultimately gave me a gift I couldn't have imagined: the knowledge that my worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition, and the confidence to create the life and relationships I actually want, rather than settling for what others are willing to offer. Today, surrounded by people who celebrate my authentic self and engaged in work that reflects my values, I can honestly say that being excluded from that wedding was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because rejection feels good, but because it forced me to discover just how capable I am of creating my own happiness and building my own community of love and support.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.